I'm Allison Orr. I am one of the co-producers of last night's My Kid Would Never Do That. The topic was cheating. Got a lot of conversation in my living room. I have two small kids, and I'm here with Natalie Morales, who's going to lead the discussion and introduce everybody who's here.
Hi, everyone. Yes, this certainly sparked a big discussion in my house as well with my 8-year-old. And let me introduce our panelists today. We have Rosalind Wiseman, who we saw throughout the episode. She's a parenting expert and author of Queen Bees and Wannabes. Allison Orr, obviously, is our Dateline producer, as you saw. We have also joining us Betsy Landers, who's the president of the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association. And Heather Armstrong back with us again, who is the blogger I guess she's the parenting expert with the blog deuce.com. Sorry about that, Heather. Good to have you all with us. So we sparked another really great topic of conversation. A lot of parents sat down and watched this episode with their kids once again, having to do with the cheating. And in this case, we had two different scenarios, as you saw, with the cheating in the gym versus cheating on a test in the library. So let me start off with one of the questions here from Greg Miller. He said on Twitter, once it's not all about the grade, they stop cheating. Eric Logan on Twitter also said kids feel the need to cheat because of the win by any means and failure is not an option attitude that is pushed on them, which is something that we heard over and over again as a theme, that if you stop focusing so much on the grade and more just on the learning, then that's when you're going to see the cheating stop. Well, so I guess the question is, how much does pressure in getting good grades impact kids' decision to cheat? So, Rosalind, let me start that off with you. Why are kids cheating more these days?
Well, I think they don't want to disappoint their parents, and they feel like they have only one option, which is to succeed. And if there's something really wrong with them, and if they fail or they're perceived to fail, then they're going to have to hide it, or they'll have to lie. And so, I think sometimes kids feel like they have to choose between two bad decisions. One is lying to your parents if you don't do well, or you haven't prepared, or you can't prepare, or you're overwhelmed, or cheating. And cheating in that moment sometimes feels easier than the longer consequences of talking to your parents.
And Allison, what we saw even just in some of the interviews that we did with some of the students is they're using all means necessary, it seems, to cheat these days, from cell phones to writing on their hands to little pieces of paper that they hide in certain places. So is it that parents are underestimating how much kids are cheating? Allison?
Well, I saw that when we talked to kids, and it wasn't even just the kids who made it into the broadcast, that they made it sound like cheating was so prevalent that also kids didn't see it as a big deal. Which, so when you talk about this as an ethical issue, if they don't see it as a transgression, then it's not even, a matter of should I or shouldn't I. It just becomes definitely the easy way out. And even after we started shooting this, all the kids that we met subsequently in the other My Kid Would Never Do That when we were doing other topics, I just off camera, we just ended up, some of us talked about cheating, and every single kid we met said, oh yeah, cheating in school? Yeah, of course, I've done it, everybody's done it. It was an eye-opener for me. I did not know that.
But was it different then? I mean, we did see the other scenario with sports, and it's considered not as cool. Is that right, Rosalind? Let me go back to you.
Well, I mean, I think I want the PTA. I know you guys really know a lot about these kinds of things. But I make the distinction, or I've seen the distinction between. There's a ruthlessness that I think we really need to look at about parents being not only super competitive and super wanting their kids to win. It's also because there's always understandable reasons for why parents do the things that they do. Even when we take a step back and we think, oh my gosh, that was totally crazy what I just did. But the thing of, for example, if you have a kid who does really well and like makes varsity as a freshman, and that child is under so much pressure because you are proud of them, because they made the cut. And even being proud of your kid that they've made this achievement can really get the kid feeling like they have to continue that level of success, as you said, but with any means necessary. So when we get to that place, it's this really weird kind of looking at it from a different position, which is parents need to realize that when their kids succeed, that what is the cost of succeeding, or what is it set up for the kid that they feel like they can never do worse. They always have to be continually perfecting and excelling at things. And that gets kids who are really, really good at stuff to cheat. And that's where they feel like it's all falling apart around them.
And let me get Betsy to weigh in here as the president of the PTA. There was a lot of discussion on Facebook as well about standardized testing and whether or not that is in turn causing perhaps kids to cheat more, because the focus is really more about making sure they're making the grade and getting those high numbers so that they can then get into a good college. So the question is standardized testing putting undue focus on getting a good score?
I think it's a combination of things. Certainly standardized testing can be considered, but I think so much of their world today, so much of the news that surrounds them highlights, businessmen, sports figures who all in some way cheat or circumvent the law. And so it's become commonplace to them. And if adults are modeling this behavior, then it somehow is more acceptable. So standardized testing, any testing. And unfortunately, education is not really in the equation anymore. Good grades are, but we've gotten away from the education. Mm-hmm. And I agree with Rosalind. Parents really need to examine the message they're sending. They need to look at the amount of pressure they're putting on their child and what kind of motivation they're giving the children. We all want our children to do their very best, not necessarily be the best, and that's a very important distinction, is to encourage them to do their best and not give them the pressure of having to be the best.
That brings us to a really good question. Heather, let me ask you, I know you have two little ones, but, maybe not really getting grades just yet, but as somebody who writes about these topics for parents, there's been a lot of focus about the pressure, not only in just getting good grades, but going to the right schools, being on the right team, so that you can then have the right or the best life. In fact, there was even a Wall Street Journal article recently on this very, very topic that, maybe we are putting so much pressure on them from the very beginning, from the time they're, your kid's age, starting 2, 3 years old, that really failure is not an option. What do you have to add to that?
Well, I think, especially with my generation, we extracurricularize, if that's a word, our children, and we put them in soccer and in chess and piano and like so many extracurricular activities. And when I really made an effort when my children were born I was like, I'm going to let them be good at what they want to be good at, and I want them to have I want them to be able to spread themselves, into one activity, not 10 activities. And so I've really, really backed off in terms of, making my kids the best at everything. And my oldest, my 8-year-old, actually goes to a school where they focus on the real world application of knowledge, which I think is really important. Where it's not, the best grades, it's we're learning these things because we're going to use them in our daily lives. And I think that takes the pressure off of the kids as well.
You know what I think, just jumping off that, in New York, there's a controversy now about the kids in public school being prepped for preschool tests. They prepped in preschool to take standardized tests to get into the best elementary schools. And everybody I know says, well, that is so crazy. I'm totally against that. And yet, do you want your kid to fail because you haven't prepped them? It's almost like you get people who know it's wrong, and suddenly everybody wants to send their 4-year-old to Kaplan to be prepped. It's just, how do parents, do you have any advice for how parents can kind of resist that pressure, that they're not giving their kids every opportunity if they're not doing what other people are doing?
Rosalind, you want to jump in there?
Oh my! Well, the other part is that it also means that parents aren't looking at the individual children, right? Like Heather, you were talking about. So I've got one child who is not as competitive as the other child, not in the same way. And so what one venue, which is appropriate and more competitive, is not appropriate for the other one. And what we've got, and I think we've got to really be clear about what is it that for parents to sit back and say to themselves quietly, not when their kids are around them, but like quietly at the end of the day, and say, what is it that I want my child, what is, inventorying your kid, what is the best thing for them? What is the best thing for our family? How are we going to conduct ourselves in a way that makes us sane? And so it gets away from the moment that you start saying to yourself, I want to give my child the best opportunities, which makes perfect sense. Like if you just say that to yourself, Well, my job as a parent is to give my child every opportunity, and is to, celebrate and to encourage them with the things that they love to do. On the face of it, there is nothing that makes more sense than that. But that phrase in our head for parents makes us crazy. And so that will justify and rationalize for us doing the craziest things. And that means, for example, covering for your child, not holding your kid accountable, prepping for these things, because all you're listening to is all of the parents have decided that school, like Alice was talking about, is the best school for all children. I mean, one of the most frustrating things that I say to parents, because it's frustrating because they don't listen to me a lot, is there is no perfect school for every child. Every child has to find the school that's good for them. And you can hear the parents say, now what's the best school?
Yeah.
so it's a very frustrating. It's frustrating, and so it's important that shows like this are a way for us to take our collective breath and say, what is the best way forward, and that maybe I need to rethink how I'm thinking about how to give my child every opportunity.
Speaking of who wanted to comment?
I was just going to add something. I think as parents, we always want to diminish the motivations that cause our children to cheat in the first place. And also, we sometimes forget that we need to prep them for the peer pressure they're going to experience. Because as they come up through school, they're definitely going to experience that. And I know, listening to Heather, at an early age and having 3 children compete in everything, I think one of the things I had to learn as a parent is to help my children fail successfully, to let them know that failure is not that bad, that you can overcome. And I think we, in today's parents, very much want their children to succeed at everything. And they're really leaving off an important part of parenting by helping them to fail, so that they understand that it's not the end of the world, and they can work harder and achieve what they need to achieve.
Let me go back to you, Rosalind, because you have some great parenting tips. I mean, obviously, we've heard already the most important message for parents is to de-emphasize the grade and to really focus on your kids' learning. But you also have some other great tips. And I think, speaking of the role of peer pressure, and as we saw what you did with the kids, and you showed them how to kind of deal with it, can you remind us again, what are some things that parents can then help their kids use in the classroom when somebody's trying to cheat off of them?
Sure. Well, I think what's important is not to make this so that it sounds really fake and awkward. So, stopping everything and saying, you are cheating, you need to stop. That is against the rules. Kids can say things, they don't even actually need to say words. They can communicate without words, where it puts the other person on notice that you're not going to accept what's happening. So what I was suggesting to the kids is to be very fast and very to the point about what was happening. So, for example, you can say not happening, right? I mean, you don't have to say exactly what that is. The kid knows what it is. So that there's graduated communication about what's going on. Betsy reminded me, actually, Natalie, of one of the things that I really took away from doing the show, which was it was an extraordinary experience to listen to the parents say, when you would ask them, is teaching honesty important to you? And every parent, you could hear it in their voice, they would say, yes, it's incredibly important to me. Right. But what you, for the most part, saw, and it's very much to her point, is that they weren't talking to their kids about how honesty would be challenged in their day-to-day lives. And then, therefore, they weren't able to prepare for it, because it was like out of the blue when it came, and then you would get nervous, and then you would succumb to the peer pressure around you. And that's what I think is the most important thing about the show, is that the parents were saying, yes, honesty is very important to me, but they hadn't thought about teaching their kid what it looked like, about when that would be challenged. And so that's when, as Betsy, as you're saying, that the peer pressure really then takes over, and the group dynamics take over, and they trump basically the kids wanting to be honest. And that's an important thing for parents to see.
For example, you're saying if you're using specific examples with your kids, which
absolutely
recommends you say, what would you do in the situation, which we kind of did with our kids, is we stapled the answers to the questions to the back. And, that's happened to some kids where you come across the answer sheet. What do you do if you're presented with the answer sheet? How do you handle that? That's
right. What if you do when someone takes out their cell phone, right? What do you do? I mean, those are you need to connect your family values and what you're talking about with your kid to, and then therefore, when you're in class and you see somebody take out their cell phone and they're not supposed to, what do you do?
Now, what about tattletaling? I mean, if you do catch someone in the act, you're going to be labeled very uncool if you then tell on them. So how do you handle that?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that's really important is parents get really fixated on, like, my kid can't come forward because then they will be ostracized 100%. My experience with this is that usually if the kid handles it calmly, you know, like the way that I'm talking about, like, not happening, stop, whatever, but that it's usually not this one thing that, frankly, makes all of the kids turn on them. It is oftentimes so I'm not blaming the kid for having, you know, being labeled a snitch or a tattletale, but I just want parents to realize that it's usually not that one thing that triggers that, you know, that kind of social alienation or the social isolation or social alienation from the kid. So if we can give kids very concrete, short things to do, then I think that you've got a way for kids to be able to, they don't want to be embarrassed. They can be held accountable, but they don't want to be embarrassed, say it that way.
Mm-hmm. Heather, let me ask you, because obviously, you know, you have young kids, but what is the conversation online when it comes to talking with your kids about situations like this?
Well, one thing I was going to say was my biggest takeaway from the show last night was not just about cheating, but about the peer pressure around it. And I found myself being uncomfortable, especially in the sports section where the actress who was hired was saying, oh, come on, guys, you know, let's just fudge the number, you know. And I felt myself not wanting to be a part of the conflict. Like, as an adult, as a 36-year-old person, I was like, oh, my gosh, like, how are these children, right, you know, if I don't want to be part of a conflict, how are these children going to resist, you know, that temptation? And so for me, it was such a huge eye-opener in terms of teaching my child to stand up for herself and realizing that conflict isn't a bad thing when it comes to integrity and honesty.
Yeah, we had the same conversation in my house, because also talking about peer pressure is very abstract too, and you have to find specific ways to talk about peer pressure. You can't just tell your kid, don't do what everybody else does, but if you have these very specific examples, and my son, after we watched one of the, you know, the cheating scenarios play out, I said, well, what would you do in that situation? And he said, he was very honest. He said, well, it's easier for me to say what I would do on watching it, but in real life, and then we got to have a conversation about peer pressure, the difference between saying what you do and actually being able to do it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Can
you see these questions, Natalie?
Yeah, let me ask.
Yes,
we've got
great.
a question from Edwin, who's on with us on Google+, asking, expanding on the prepping your kids for failure idea, do you think we as a society are too positive and don't want to even touch on the idea of failure, which will lead to possible cheating? Betsy, you want to handle that?
I'll give it a try. I think we are very focused on success in the right school, going to the right college. You know, we've made it so that standardized testing now really is important to teachers, even more so in the past. So there's a lot of pressure from teachers, from parents, onto the kids to really succeed. And everybody wants their child to be the best, to win. Mm-hmm. But prepping them to fail is important, because once they leave, particularly once they leave high school, they go off on their own to college, there's going to be a point in time when they fail. And if they've not experienced failure at a young age where they have their parents there to catch them, to help them understand it, and it's one of the reasons we see a rise in suicide when they hit college, is because in many cases they've never experienced failure, and they don't know how to handle it, and they think they've disappointed everyone, which Rosalind said in the very beginning. They've disappointed their parents, they've disappointed their teachers, and they don't see a way out.
Yeah. Rosalind, you want to add to that?
Well, one of the things, I actually don't like saying this, but it's been my experience as a parent, is that on the other side, which is really hard for me to navigate, and this is as a parent, is is not allowing kids on this theme of not accepting failure is that when the kids do badly, like they're in a game, they're in a sports game, and they do badly. They're terrible. They're terrible. They can't throw the ball. They can't kick the ball. They're terrible. And I've seen this, and it really, I couldn't believe it was so not what I wanted to see. And I saw these teachers say, "You did a great job. You were so good today." And not only was that not true, but it also comes across as you can't take me being straightforward with you about you not doing so well. So I'm not talking about saying to the kids, "Oh my gosh, you were terrible. I can't believe you were so bad."
Right.
But to be able to actually say, "Yeah, we didn't do a great job today, and here's the reasons why, and this is how we're going to improve." And the other part, of course, is the kids, you could see it on their faces. They just looked at the teachers like, "Yeah, right. We're terrible."
Yeah, kids
Right.
know.
Kids are feeling this way. The teachers are just spouting this stuff, and it really comes across, and I think it's those sort of another side of what Betsy's talking about, that you can't stand to fail. And it really comes across to the kids as if either the adults are too stupid to recognize what's really going on, or they don't think the kids can handle it.
Right.
And that makes kids disengage from the entire process, because why are you going to be taught by somebody who can't actually tell you what they need to say to you? So it's been a frustration for me as a parent to see that.
Yeah. Let me ask a question coming in from Robin, joining us on Google+. Do you think last night with having 2 cheaters in those segments was a little too much? It seemed as though they may have been even older than some of the participants too, which I think ties into the peer pressure you were just talking about. Allison, you want to, as the producer of the segment?
As the producer, well, first of all, we needed 2 in a lot of the segments for it to be believable, because it's just one person was saying, "Hey, I'm going to cheat." We kind of used the 2 actors to play off each other so that one thinks of the idea and somebody goes along, which I think is actually the most realistic way that this happens. That, all it takes is one person has the bad idea, someone goes along, and suddenly the group think takes over. So we wanted it to be, realistic, so the actors were to help each other. And also, if the statistics are right, and these come from self-reporting studies, that 85% of kids in high school have cheated, then the numbers are, if you got a room full of 6 kids, statistically, at least, more than 2 of them would be quote-unquote cheaters. So that's why we chose to use 2 actors. And I think it did actually increase the peer pressure, but I think that peer pressure is real, right? Is that what everybody
And they weren't always older than the others. I think they're actually about the same age. I think maybe in 1 or 2 examples, right?
But actually, one of the things that was interesting, because I remember talking about this afterwards, I can't remember with who, but with younger kids, there's either one of 2 things happen. One is the kids totally get silent, and they get very quiet, and they are passive bystanders. But the other part is if they, and I can't remember his name, the person whose name is Justice in
Andre, right?
Remember?
I was going to say that.
He was very, very clear from the very beginning that what was happening was wrong, and not to take away at all from how he was raised or who he is as a person. But when you are 11 and you're seeing things in very concrete ways, it's easier sometimes for people who are 11, where it's yes or no, right or wrong.
Very black and white to them.
Right, compared to when you're 14 and actually you're the same age, so you sort of want to like them more, right? They're your peers. And it's harder to be able to say what you're really feeling, because you also have a lot more complications going on in your head about making the decisions you're making. So having the younger kids there, I saw that, and it was really an interesting dynamic between one, you either saw that or the kid capitulated, or another where the kid was like, "This is wrong, and we need to not do it."
All right, one just final question or thought here. We did have some people talking on our Facebook as well as on Twitter about the fact that we were sort of, in a way, encouraging the cheating, or I guess engaged in deception, because we put these kids and their parents had their kids be a part of this to highlight cheating. So, Allison, do you want to talk about that?
We did have some comments from people who pointed out, I guess, the irony that we had, sort of brought kids to a place under false pretenses for a demonstration about cheating. We had a lot of talks about that here inside at Dateline before we decided to do it. It is kind of an element of all of these shows, but it's a way that we can have, I think, for the parents who agreed to do it, it's just a completely unique, revealing look at their kids when they don't know they're being watched. There's really no other way to get at the issue about cheating and deception unless you know that you're not being watched. In fact, some of the experts, Eric Anderman, who is in the piece, who's a researcher and researches academic cheating, says it's a really hard subject to research. You can't do like double-blind studies and also have release forms that people sign, because you can't tell people the whole point of cheating is not to get caught and to have it be hidden from people. So we felt like this was an appropriate use of the hidden camera and the model to get at something that necessarily is supposed to be hidden from other people.
And they're all really great kids who were part of our show as well, and their parents were incredible parents, very courageous in letting their kids participate in this as well. And it really, the idea is hopefully this is a lesson for the greater good, so that everybody takes away the positive messaging here and doesn't focus on that other aspect. I just want to thank, anybody else have any final thoughts they want to add to this? Heather, you want to add anything extra?
I was going to talk about, you know, the failure aspect of things. My oldest child takes piano. That's her extracurricular. And we are constantly reinforcing the fact that it's okay to mess up. And in fact, when we mess up, we learn and we do better the next time. And that actually messing up can sometimes be a good thing. And so that's a constant lesson that we're trying to teach her so that she can take that forward.
And Betsy, do you want to close out with any final thoughts?
I think we've given some really good tips, because I think preventing cheating is where all parents want to go. But if I were to say one last thing to parents is to set a good example, to make sure your behavior is reflecting what you're saying, because our younger kids will mimic our behavior, but teenagers really notice the little white lies or the I'm just going to do this but no one will know. If you're doing it as an adult, then that gives them, it makes them feel like you're giving permission.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Tell them I'm not home. Answer the phone for me and tell somebody I'm...
Absolutely.
Can't do that.
But that's a good little white lie. Right? There are some that are acceptable. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank all of our panelists as well, and I want to remind everyone, next week we have an incredible hour. This is on discrimination. It's incredibly powerful, really important given all of the stories in the news most recently, the Trayvon Martin tragedy as well. Something that you want to sit down with your kids and watch with them, because I think you'll see it's probably one of the most powerful hours I think we've produced, and we're really proud of it, and hopefully it gets a lot of parents talking about this at home. So be sure to tune in on our discrimination hour. Go ahead, Allison.
I would say it's just another really hard conversation to find a way to bring up with your kids about discrimination, and it's a hard topic to broach, and so hopefully this will give people an opportunity.
Well, thank you guys once again. Thanks to Rosalind Wiseman. Thank you to Allison, or obviously Betsy Landers, the president of the PTA, and Heather Armstrong, who blogs on Deuce.com. Thanks, guys, so much once again.
Thank you. Thanks,
Have
Natalie.
a great day. Bye.
Bye.